The Coast Guard detained a 77-year-old veteran on his boat, and just 30 minutes later, one of his former students led a Navy fleet to his rescue. Why was he taken? What made Tide's honor so special? And what moment made the entire Oregon coastline hold its breath as the fleet appeared? This isn't just a story about a boat being seized. It's a journey of devotion, mentorship, and how one man turned pain into a guiding light for the next generation. Join us as we uncover the story of Samuel Ortiz, a Navy veteran who helped his community rediscover the true value of education and sacrifice. Don't look away, because this story will take you from injustice to a breathtaking climax where truth ignites like fire. Subscribe now so you never miss another story that stirs the soul. These are stories from the ocean. Samuel Ortiz, 77 years old, was the unwavering soul of the small town of Netarts, Oregon. For nearly 4 decades, he lived in a wooden house beside the harbor, where every morning he would step out wearing his worn Navy jacket, sand-dusted shoes, and walk to the dock with steady purpose. His silver hair peeked beneath a faded cap. He nodded to passing fishermen, offered a firm smile to the kids selling bait. He spoke little, but his presence was solid, like a mast that stood tall through every storm. His boat, Tide's Honor, had been anchored at the dock for 35 years, its rugged oak hull weathered, its mooring lines imprinted with his hands, and a plaque in the cockpit engraved with 3 simple words: respect the ocean. To outsiders, it was just an old boat, but to Netarts, it was a beacon of education. Samuel had built Tide's Honor after leaving the Navy, where he had served as a swimming instructor, training hundreds of sailors in open-sea survival. The boat became his mission after losing his wife in a tragic shipwreck, a way to transform grief into purpose. Free swimming lessons for underprivileged youth. Each summer, he stood tall on the deck, voice strong, teaching kids to face fear, swim through waves, and respect the sea. The ocean doesn't forgive, he would say, but it teaches you to get back up. That morning, Netarts Harbor was quiet. Samuel was preparing for a new swim session, checking safety ropes, polishing the plaque. A 15-year-old student named Leo helped him secure the lines. Everything was ready. Samuel untied the moorings, ran his hand over the plaque, and whispered, "It's a good day, kids." But just as the engine began to hum, a black SUV rolled up to the dock. A young Coast Guard officer stepped out, his face cold, eyes sharp. He asked for activity permits. Calmly, Samuel pulled a folder from his jacket. Boat registration, instructor credentials, all valid. The officer scanned the papers, frowned. "Unlicensed swim instruction," he said, voice dry as sand. "This vessel is in violation." Samuel replied, voice deep and steady, "I've taught swimming for 30 years. I've never needed a permit." But the officer wasn't listening. A patrol boat approached. Its wake rocked Tide's Honor. 3 more officers boarded, without questions, without words. They tied Samuel's hands and forced him down onto the deck, as if he were a criminal. Samuel knelt, his gaze unshaken. "This boat teaches children how to survive," he said firmly. "Are you here to take away their hope, too?" No one answered. One young officer looked momentarily uneasy, but the others moved without pause. The engine roared. Tide's Honor was pulled away, mooring ropes trailing like loose threads around the dock post. Samuel remained on board, restrained, watching his boat disappear beyond the harbor bend. He didn't move. Though bound, his hands still gripped the edge of the deck. By mid-morning, a small crowd gathered. Some knew Samuel. Others were just curious. Leo, the young student, recorded everything. Samuel tied up, silent. He posted the video online with the caption, "They took Mr. Samuel." No one asked what had happened. No one spoke. They simply watched, eyes full of hesitation. Samuel was brought ashore and placed on an old wooden bench. He wasn't angry, just tired. From his pocket, he pulled a small notebook, a log of every student he had taught over 3 decades. He flipped to the last page, blank. The pen remained in his pocket. Clara, the cafe owner, brought him a cup of black coffee. He nodded in thanks but didn't drink. The cup sat cooling beside him. A few people offered quiet words. Samuel responded briefly, voice faint. The Coast Guard didn't return. The mayor, who once attended Samuel's swim classes, never appeared. Netarts fell into silence, as if injustice had sealed every door shut. Some whispered, he should have applied for a permit. But those who had seen Samuel teach, who had watched him pull drowning kids from the sea, knew Tide's honor wasn't just a boat. It was a torch, a flame lighting the path to survival. The Coast Guard issued a statement. Vessel detained due to unauthorized activity. Cold words. No mention of Samuel. No mention of Tide's honor. The town resumed its rhythm, but something smoldered beneath the surface. Samuel sat, his gaze fixed on the bay. He wasn't waiting for anyone, only hoping that Tide's honor would remain a light for the children, still learning to swim against the current. Samuel Ortiz sat quietly on the wooden bench, his student log clenched tightly in his hands. His gaze was like a spear, cutting through the space where Tide's honor had been dragged away. Netarts Harbor, usually alive with the sounds of rattling mooring lines and laughter, now sat in sharp, suspended silence, like a blade hanging midair. News of Samuel being bound, his boat seized, spread like wildfire across Netarts, from the coffee shop to the bait store, igniting the quiet corners of the small town. Tide's honor wasn't just a boat. It was a torch that lit up the dreams of struggling youth. Samuel, a former Navy swim instructor, had turned his boat into a floating classroom, teaching kids how to swim through waves, conquer fear, and rise after failure. For 30 years, hundreds of students, from poor kids to lost teenagers, found hope on that deck. The ocean is a teacher, Samuel would say, voice strong. It teaches you courage. But now, the boat was gone, and Samuel sat there, like a warrior who had lost his flag. Online, the video titled, "They Took Mr. Samuel," exploded like a bomb. Thousands of views poured in. Comments flooded the feed. Free Mr. Samuel. Tide's honor was our school. A former sailor in Portland recognized the name Ortiz. He posted urgently, Samuel Ortiz trained me in 1975. He saved me during a survival drill. He's a legend. That post was a bullet, piercing through social media, from Oregon to distant shores, touching millions of Americans. Leo, the 15-year-old student, stood near the dock, eyes red. He had grown up in the slums, learned to swim with Samuel, and found hope on Tide's honor. Now, watching his teacher bound, he clenched his phone and posted another video. Mr. Samuel is my father. That clip, like fire, spread even faster. Clara, the coffee shop owner, shared it. Samuel taught my son to swim. He's a hero. In San Diego, Ethan Hayes, One of Samuel's former students, now a Navy destroyer commander, sat in his office. Leo's video hit him like a wave. Ethan, now 42, had been saved by Samuel during a brutal swim test in 1990. "You've got heart," Samuel had said, pulling him from the surf. Now, that fire was back in Ethan's chest. He picked up the phone, voice sharp. "Ready the fleet. We're going to Oregon." Samuel knew none of this. He sat still, logbook in hand, his gaze unbroken. Clara brought fresh-baked bread. "Stay strong, Mr. Samuel," she said, her voice trembling. He nodded, but didn't touch it. He flipped through the logbook, names from 3 decades glowing like torches. The last page, blank. The pen in his pocket, unused. The Coast Guard updated their statement. "Vessel detained due to unauthorized activity." Cold words, like nails into wood. No mention of Samuel. No mention of Tide's honor. The mayor stayed silent. His office remained locked. But online, the story roared. A group of former sailors in Seattle formed a coalition, shouting, "Bring back Tide's honor!" The hashtag had Free Tide's Honor spread from Oregon to California, touching people who had never even heard of NetArts. Leo stood on the dock, eyes burning. "He won't lose," he said with conviction. Samuel looked up, a flicker in his eyes, but said nothing. He clutched the notebook, as if holding on to the future of every child he'd taught. An old fisherman, who once watched Samuel rescue a student from drowning, muttered, "Tide's honor is his heart." Those words rippled through the crowd, like a signal flare. A young man, once a student, went live. "This is NetArts, and we're fighting for Mr. Samuel." Old photos of Tide's honor flooded the internet. Samuel on deck, pointing to the horizon, the boat carrying students through waves, smiling children under the sun. Each image cut deep, like blades slicing through injustice. A retired naval officer posted, "Samuel Ortiz trained me. Tide's honor forged heroes." That post was shared thousands of times. Ethan, back at the base, checked his phone. His eyes sharpened. Then, a calm, firm voice into his radio. "The fleet is ready." Samuel didn't know. His gaze remained steady, like a warrior waiting for one last battle. The harbor pulsed, with the heartbeat of a story that would not be silenced. NetArts stood still, like a battlefield before the final charge, waiting for justice to rise in flames. In Samuel Ortiz's hands was an old leather-bound notebook, its pages stained with seawater, sweat, and youth. Every name written inside belonged to a child who once trembled at the waves, and then learned to rise from fear. But now, Samuel's eyes weren't focused on those pages of memory. His gaze, sharp, cold, unyielding, was locked on the distance, on Tide's honor, tied down and impounded by the Coast Guard. NetArts Harbor, once filled with the chime of mooring lines, the splash of fish beneath the pier, and the laughter of students jumping into the water, now stood still, silent, like a church after the final prayer. No one spoke. No one moved. The town was holding its breath, as if this wasn't a harbor, but an arena. And Samuel Ortiz was the last warrior standing. News of his arrest traveled faster than any radio wave. From high school classrooms to auto shops, from the small church to the bakery. People whispered, then fumed, then exploded. They didn't see an old man in handcuffs. They saw a legend dishonored. A man who gave everything, now being stripped of the one thing he had left, Tide's honor. That boat wasn't just oak and rigging. It was a floating classroom, a training ground, a refuge for lost kids. Samuel, former Navy swim instructor, had spent decades turning Tide's honor into a forge for grit and courage. He didn't just teach them to swim. He taught them how to face fear, how to fall and get back up, how to live with purpose. "The sea is a threshold," he once said, his voice like a war drum. "Cross it, and you don't just survive, you become immortal." Then, social media erupted. A video titled, "Coast Guard Arrests Coach Samuel. Why?" spread across Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook. Within 3 hours, 500,000 views. Comments flooded in like a monsoon. "Free Coach Samuel! Tide's honor saved my son!" You don't arrest hope. In Seattle, an Olympic swimmer shared her story. "In 2002, I was a kid terrified of water. Samuel Ortiz pushed me into the ocean, not to drown me, but to teach me how to float. Today, I have a gold medal because of him. He was the light in my darkness." That post exploded. CNN picked it up. ESPN quoted it. Veterans forums lit up with photos of Samuel, standing on Tide's honor, arm outstretched, pointing the way through the storm. And in San Diego, one man sat frozen, a man who once owed his life to Samuel Ortiz. Ethan Hayes, 42, commander of a U.S. Navy destroyer, stared at his screen. The Olympian's words hit him like a spear. He had once been a nameless boy in 1991, swept away by a riptide, panicking, almost drowning. The man who pulled him out wasn't a medic, wasn't a lifeguard. It was Samuel Ortiz. "You've got the heart of a warrior," Samuel told him, eyes blazing like floodlights in a stormy night. Now, that heart was on fire again. Ethan shot to his feet. "Fleet," he said into the radio. "Ready up. We're heading to Netarts. Our legend does not fight alone." Meanwhile, Samuel knew none of this. He still stood there, eyes fixed on his beloved boat. Clara, his longtime friend, approached with trembling hands, holding a cup of hot coffee. "You didn't just teach the kids to swim," she whispered. "You taught this whole town how to stand tall." Samuel nodded. He didn't drink. He didn't speak. He only clutched his notebook, the one with one blank page left. The Coast Guard released a cold statement. "Tide's honor detained due to navigation violations." No mention of Samuel, no mention of history, no mention of the lives he had saved. The mayor of Netarts remained silent, office locked, media inquiries declined. But the internet does not sleep. A group of former students created an online movement, Bring Her Back. Within hours, hundreds of thousands had joined. The hashtag #FreeTidesHonor crossed 1 million impressions. Netarts, once a forgotten pin on a map, was now the epicenter of a movement driven by the people. Mia, a young girl once pulled from the water by Samuel, live-streamed from the dock. "He taught me not to fear death. Now, who will teach the world not to abandon those who taught us?" Another Navy veteran shared, "Ortiz trained me in 1981. Without Tide's honor, I wouldn't have survived my first mission." Ethan read that on his phone. His eyes lit up. "Move," he commanded. And this time, he wasn't leading a warship into battle. He was keeping a promise. Samuel still didn't know, but his gaze, burning like a storm-lit flame, was ready. Ready for a fight not of swords and steel, but of memory, conviction, and the names in a notebook not yet finished. Netarts, harbor trembled. not from the waves, but from the footsteps gathering, from the hearts rising, for the man who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. Netarts was no longer a quiet coastal town. It had become a blazing forge. The ocean was no longer a backdrop, but a roar, a cry for justice for a boat, and for the man who made it a symbol. On the shore, Samuel Ortiz stood tall, like a bronze statue against the sea wind. In his hands, the student log, held tightly, each page a life he had saved, a soul he had touched. His eyes, burning like molten steel, were fixed on Tide's honor, the boat held captive behind cold legal barriers. But today, the law was no longer the blade. Today, the will of the people was the fire. The crowd gathered around him, from calloused-handed fishermen to the children who once learned to swim under his guidance. All held their breath. Every gaze turned to the bay, where the waves began to churn, not from the wind, but from something approaching. Then it happened. A deep rumble echoed in the distance, not thunder, but the engines of warships. 3 Navy destroyers emerged from the mist, their bows slicing the sea, American flags whipping in the wind like declarations. Engines roared, a battle drum in the afternoon sky, and then, whoosh! A fighter jet thundered overhead, its steel wings shrieking as it tore through the sky, sending a gust of wind so fierce the harbor shook beneath it. The people of Netarts stood frozen, eyes wide. An elderly woman dropped her tray, ceramic shattered. Children stumbled. Men who had once braved open seas clutched the railings to stay upright. No one knew exactly what was happening, but they all understood. Something greater had begun. From the lead ship, Ethan Hayes stepped ashore. His Navy uniform gleamed in the evening sun. His eyes, fierce, unwavering, were lit with the same fire Samuel once carried 30 years ago. But it wasn't anger, it was loyalty. Ethan didn't come alone. 3 senior officers followed, upright, steady, their eyes fixed on Samuel Ortiz. The crowd parted, as if sliced by an invisible blade, as Ethan walked toward the man who once taught him how to fight waves and fear. He knelt before Samuel, placed a firm hand on his shoulder, and held it tightly. Their nod needed no words, only memory. Then Ethan rose, turned to face the town, and his voice rang out, clear, commanding, electric. Tide's honor is not a fishing boat. It's where my mentor, Mr. Samuel Ortiz, trained hundreds of sailors and saved countless lives. If you ever survive the sea, it might be because of him. A pause. The ship horns blared behind him, like punctuation. Clara, standing nearby, wiped tears from her cheeks. Ethan continued, his voice lower now, but heavier, striking hearts like a hammer. He broke no law. He is the light, and this America does not abandon the ones who lit the way for us. A hush swept through the crowd. Some nodded. Some placed hands over hearts. Even the Coast Guard officers lowered their heads. The young officer who had issued the seizure order stepped forward, his voice trembling. I'm sorry, sir. Ethan looked at him, but didn't respond. He didn't need apologies. He needed action. At that moment, another figure stepped from the line of officers. Colonel Elena Torres. Her uniform was crisp white, her medals shining. Every step she took carried the weight of untold history. She stood before Samuel, then bowed. Sir, she said, her voice firm as a command. "The United States Navy owes you a debt of honor." She said nothing of regulations. She told a story. In 1986, she had been a young cadet, dragged far out during a training drill. No one dared to jump in, except one man, Samuel Ortiz. "He didn't just save me," she said. "He forged me into a commander." She reached out her hand. Another officer placed in it a gleaming brass plaque etched with the words, "In honor of Samuel Ortiz, the torch of the sea." Samuel took it. He looked at the plaque as if he could see every old face come back to life. His eyes welled with tears, but his hands held steady. Ethan stepped in and embraced him. Another officer handed over a perfectly folded American flag, the kind reserved only for those who gave a life in service to an ideal. Samuel received it, clutching it as if he held a lifetime in his hands. Netart's harbor trembled, not from the warships, but from the hearts of the people. Every soul on that dock beat in unison with Tide's honor. The fleet had not just brought steel, it had brought recognition. Netart's blazed like a torch, like Tide's honor, like Samuel Ortiz. Samuel Ortiz stood tall on the deck of Tide's honor, the ocean wind whipping through his silver hair, his student log open in his hands like pages from a living history. His gaze swept across Netart's harbor, not as a man who had just won a battle, but as a lighthouse in the storm, still guiding the next generation forward. The boat once dragged away as evidence had now returned. No longer a vessel under lock and key, but a blazing symbol. It was a torch. The place where broken dreams were reignited through sweat, tears, and the unwavering belief of one man. Netart's was once a quiet town tucked beside the sea, but now it had awakened. No longer a faded dot on the Oregon map, it had become a name the entire nation turned toward. A place where courage sparked a movement, and the story of one man and his boat shook an entire system. After Colonel Elena Torres's emotional speech, the United States Navy didn't just return Tide's honor. They did something unprecedented. They formally recognized Samuel Ortiz's swim training program as a national model, with plans to expand it across the country, from the shores of Oregon to military training centers in Florida, New York, and the Great Lakes. Within months, Samuel was no longer bound by cold paperwork or false accusations. He stood among a new class of students, young, nervous, but hungry to rise, and his voice rang out like a battle drum. "The sea is the test. You are the ones rewriting your story." Beside him stood Mia, once a 16-year-old girl he pulled from the water, now his assistant coach. She walked the deck confidently, teaching kids how to tie lines, check life vests, her voice strong, her eyes sharp. To the new students, she looked like a legend in the making. And in her, Samuel's flame burned on. Ethan Hayes, the Navy destroyer commander who once led the fleet to Netart's, returned too, but this time not as an officer. He returned as a student. He knelt before Samuel on the dock, surrounded by a crowd now silent. No grand speeches, just a smile and 5 simple words. "You changed our lives, sir." Fishermen from the surrounding towns began bringing old timber, thick planks, fresh rope. No one told them to. They came to help restore Tide's honor, not because it was broken, but because they wanted to be part of the legacy it had built. Clara, the woman who once quietly brought Samuel coffee during his house arrest, organized donations from the church, from the fish markets, and even from strangers who had never set foot on the boat, but believed in what Samuel stood for. what America needed. The children of Netarts, instead of scribbling graffiti on alley walls, etched Samuel Ortiz's name into a large wooden board and hung it by the harbor's flagpole. Each name carved beneath it. A thank you. A promise. And then, one day, that dock became something more. The Ortiz Swim Center was officially opened in Netarts, not just a pool and locker rooms, but a place of reunion, where old students returned to teach the next wave, where stories of Tide's honor were told again and again, growing deeper each time, louder with every retelling. On social media, the video titled, "They Arrested Coach Samuel," still circulated, now passing 30 million views. The comments never stopped. Samuel Ortiz was the light in my darkness. Tide's honor is the future of education. I'm starting a free swim program in my state because of him. The hashtag, #FreeTides, honor no longer meant rescue. It had become a symbol of rebirth, of never giving up, of real education, not written in books but lived through action. A former student, now a swim coach in Maryland, posted a message that touched millions. Coach Samuel didn't teach me how to float. He taught me how not to sink. Samuel never sought fame. He never waited for recognition. But every morning, he still climbed aboard Tide's honor, his old notebook in hand. He stood there, watching the kids leap into the sea, listening to the splash of water, the echo of laughter. In his eyes, pride. In his quiet smile, a journey. From defeat to honor. From chains to legacy. Netarts is no longer forgotten. It is a torch, a sacred place of education and loyalty. And Tide's honor? It still bears its scars, still wears its cracks. But it was never defeated. It is living proof of this truth. When a teacher refuses to give up on their students, the world cannot give up on them. And then, as the sun dipped below the Oregon horizon, the waves kept gently tapping against the hull, like the heartbeat of a nation. Still listening. Tide's honor didn't just return to port. It returned to the heart of America. On the deck, Samuel Ortiz still stood, without medals, without slogans. He needed only one thing, to see the children. Soaked, breathless, but standing tall, emerging from fear and stepping into the light. Ethan placed a hand on his mentor's shoulder, as if passing the flame from one generation to the next. Mia, eyes bright with purpose, showed a student how to reach through the wave, her voice ringing out like Samuel's once did. And on the shore, dozens of Netarts townsfolk sat side by side, recounting the first time they heard his name. Tide's honor still bears its scars. But those scars are proof. Education is not theory. It is struggle. It is rising. It is refusing to back down. And if you're reading this now, maybe you felt a part of that fire. Let this story burn inside you. Share it with friends and loved ones across America. Hit subscribe to stay on this journey with us, where teachers never give up and the ships we sail never sink. Because some lights, once lit, can never be extinguished.